Hi guys, welcome back to Fort Reads. Tonight we are on chapter 9 of 24 Hours in Nowhere, and that puts us at 1 a.m. The tight space finally opened up and we were able to stand. Rossi held the lantern out. "Looks like we can walk a little easier now," I said. I didn't know if everyone was mad or completely worn out from the mine, the bats, and our crawl through the rock wall, but we were all quiet. Rossi walked in front of us with the lantern, and I tried to keep my eyes on the ground so I didn't trip over the many grooves, cracks, bumps, and rocks, but the cave was just so interesting. I kept looking up. A nearby wall caught my eyes. "Hey guys," I said, "look at this." They gathered around to check out what I had discovered. Drawings, but not like regular drawings anyone could have done. These were old, really old. "They're petroglyphs," Rossi said, holding the lantern up to the wall. Matthew rolled his eyes. "More National Nerdographic talk." We all stood silently as we looked over the carvings that covered the rock wall. Some of them were clearly people, stick figures with their arms and legs up, while holding what looked like canes, some with ornaments on their heads. There were also swirls I took to be snakes and other carvings that may have been lizards. Then there were some squiggly lines and shapes I couldn't decipher. "I guess we're not the first people to discover this cave," I said. Jesse put his hand to his chest and with complete seriousness and absolute reverence held the other hand out and declared, "Behold, Rossi, the work of your people." It seemed like an important moment for us, so I tried to keep a straight face, but when I saw Matthew's face, we both burst out laughing. "Really nice, guys," Jesse grumbled. "Why you gotta make fun at times like this? I simply don't understand." He stormed off into the dark. I wondered where he thought he was going, and about 2 seconds later, we heard a loud grunt as Jesse obviously tripped over something and fell. Matthew and I went to help him, but Rossi stayed where she was. I turned around. She still had the lantern up to the wall. She put her helmet down and reached out a hand like she was going to touch it. "Rossi?" I said. She pulled her hand back. "Come here, Gus," she said softly. I walked to her. "One of these things," she said, "does not belong." "What?" She stared at me. "Look." She touched my chin and turned my face towards the rock. I scanned over the images again and again. Deer, people, swirls. Deer and people and swirls, ouch, and arrows and... Can you stop? Incongruous. Out of place. Arrow. I pointed at the arrow that was different. It was larger than the rest of the arrows, and whereas the others looked like they had been carved with great care, this one seemed to be hastily scraped into the wall. "This." "Right. Why do you think it's different?" I smiled at her. "You keep asking me questions I don't know the answers to." She shrugged her shoulders like she didn't know the answer either, and we rejoined Jesse and Matthew, who couldn't get far without the light. I felt like I was in a science fiction movie and gazed around the cave. It was hard to believe it was real, that someone hadn't built it. The whole place looked like it was melting all around us with large mounds of bubbling rock, and long oozing skinny strands coming down from the ceiling so low that we had to duck under some of them. The ground boiled up under our feet. Every step was an effort as we climbed over large piles of rock and clusters of stalagmites. "Those things up there look like giant carrots." Jesse's voice sounded strange as it echoed around me. I looked up at the ceiling. "Maybe we're under some giant's garden," Matthew said, cracking himself up. "And those look like bacon," Jesse went on, ignoring Matthew. "And those rocks look like giant toasted marshmallows melting over a fire. And that whole wall looks like it's covered in popcorn. Are you hungry or something?" I asked. "I'm always hungry." Then Jesse shrieked and swatted at the air as he ran into one of the long, skinny straws. It snapped and broke. "Stop wrecking the cave, Jesse," I said. As we moved on, I looked all around us at the giant columns, trying to remember things I saw in case we got lost. I pictured us walking in circles around the cave until the lights burned out. I formed a map in my mind. I imagined one column as a sumo wrestler, another as a snowman, another as a stack of tires. Rossi walked ahead of us with the lantern. "Hey, Rossi." Matthew stepped up beside her, nearly going down as he stumbled over a loose rock. I narrowed my eye at him, but they didn't notice. "Hey, Rossi," Matthew said again as he regained his balance. "How do you ride like that?" "Oh, now you want riding tips?" I said. Matthew turned and shot me an evil look. Be quiet, Gus, he turned back to Rossi. Like what, she said. Like, how you ride. Like almost as good as Bo. Almost as good, Rossi said. Oh yeah, you're usually too far behind us to see. Matthew let out an exasperated sound, but Rossi smiled at him. I don't know. Matthew, I just ride. I don't really think about it. Riding is just like breathing. If you think too much, you crash. No one would ever accuse Matthew of thinking too much, Jessie said, walking beside me. We ducked under a few particularly long stalagmites. Matthew ignored him. Well, how'd you learn? My dad taught me. Oh, do you think he'd be willing to teach me? No. Jessie and I grinned at each other as Matthew dropped his head. Don't even take the time to think about it or anything, he mumbled. He doesn't have time for stuff like that, she said. Matthew walked quietly, his head still hung. The silt, she finally said. Huh? What about it? You always eat it in the silt, Jessie said, grunting as we climbed over a boulder. My favorite part of every race. You slow down when you hit it. If you hit it, you need to ride through it as fast as possible. Why? It's like water. If you want to glide over water, you wouldn't slow down. You'd sink. Huh? Matthew seemed to think it over. But you never ride in the silt. Not if I don't have to. I've never seen Rossi eat it in the silt, Jessie said. Maybe she knows what she's talking about. But how can you be sure there aren't any ruts or rocks under the powder? Matthew said. You can't be. Oh. And the whoops, Rossi said. Yeah? Again, go fast so you glide over the tops as much as possible. Going slow slows you down. I guess I'm just being careful, Matthew said. Being careful doesn't win races. Isn't that a little scary? What's there to be scared of? Matthew shrugged. Having a bad crash? I don't crash, she said, and there's no time for scared. Save scared for afterwards. Matthew was quiet for a moment. Anything else? Like any other tips? I rolled my eyes as their conversation continued. Rossi shouldn't be giving tips to jerks like that. Jessie whispered to me, I like watching him lose. I nodded. I don't know why she's being so nice to him. He's never been nice to her. He was there laughing when Bo took her bike. Yeah, she's too nice, Jessie complained. She should be giving him fake tips to make him crash. We quietly snickered together. Maybe that's what she's doing, he said. Don't think, don't be careful, go as fast as possible. Sounds like terrible advice. I shook my head. It's not. That's exactly how she rides. Whoa! Jessie threw an arm out across my chest. There was a large rock right in front of my feet. I had gotten complacent and hadn't been watching my steps well enough. Thanks, brother, I said before I realized it. I hadn't called Jessie brother since he started sitting at Romero's table. I felt embarrassed about it too, like I didn't have the right to call him that anymore. Stop. You're welcome, brother. Jessie patted me on the back, and we stepped over the rock, careful not to get too far behind Rossi and lose the light. How come you ditched me last year? He had made it sound like a casual question, but I could tell from his expression he didn't feel casual about it at all. Are you serious? You totally ditched me. Jessie shook his head. Nuh-uh. One day, you just decided to sit with Lewis instead of us, and then every day after that. I huffed. Yeah, well... Would you want to sit at a table where you can't understand a word anyone is saying and they're always making fun of you? Jessie frowned. Who's making fun of you? All of you, I snapped. I was mortified to realize I was on the verge of tears. I tried to regain my composure, always pointing at me and laughing and saying my name. My lower lip quivered just a little bit, so I bit it. Dude, that's because I was always telling them funny stories about stuff you've pulled. Like when you smeared peanut butter on Bo's bike seat and he looked like he had pooped his pants all day. They hated that guy. They thought it was hilarious. And when you put one of your grandma's diapers on Matthew's bar handles and everyone called him Diaper Dude for like a year after that. Jessie cracked up in his funny heaving way. It made me smile. Then I shushed him and glanced nervously at Matthew ahead of us, but he was focused on the writing tips Rossi was giving him. Anyway, Jessie said, no one has ever made fun of you. Those guys think you're funny. They even asked me once why you weren't sitting with us anymore. Well, maybe I can't understand anything you guys say. Maybe because I can't understand anything you guys say. You totally abandoned me for them. Jesse winced like I had physically hurt him. I didn't abandon you, Gus. I'm not like him. I know you're not like him, I said. I just thought things were good the way they were. Good? Jesse said, mouth agape. I didn't think it was so good watching you get tortured every day. You know, strength in numbers, Gus. It can't always be just the two of us. Plus, I like those guys. They're nice. And they don't let Bo bully them or me. Or you, when you were still hanging out with us. I swallowed, blinking back tears. I'm glad you've made new friends, I managed to say without my voice cracking. I still have room for old friends. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I sniffled and rubbed my nose. No, it doesn't. Jesse threw his head back and groaned. Isn't this just the worst day of your life? Matthew stopped and turned around. Are you serious? Jesse faced him. Yeah, I am. Matthew shook his head. Well, lucky you. Oh, you've had worse days than this? Worse than getting buried in a collapsed mine? Worse than getting trapped in a cave with no hope for escape? Worse than getting viciously attacked by millions of rabid vampire bats? Hyperbole. An extravagant exaggeration. Just about 1,000 times worth, Matthew said. Not like you care, though. You're right, Jesse crossed his arms. I don't. Matthew shook his head, turned around. After a few footsteps, he was gone. Disappeared. Like magic. Have a good night, guys.